Australia's rental market is collapsing, but not in the way you think. Rents are not falling, they are hitting record high rents. What is actually collapsing is the supply itself. Landlords should have all the power right now. Vacancy rates are under 1%. Tenants are competing 20 to 1 for every listing. But here is the thing, 65% of Australian landlords are losing money every single month. They are not celebrating, they are panicking, and they are fleeing. That paradox is breaking Australia's rental market, and these 10 cities are ground zero. Why winning landlords are bleeding money. Here is why the math no longer works. Interest rate hikes pushed mortgage costs up $1,500 to $2,000 per month on typical investment properties. But rents did not rise proportionally, they could not. Tenants were already stretched to breaking point. One Tasmanian landlord watched his costs jump from 33% to 46% of rental income in just 5 years. Even at record high rents, he is losing money every month, and he is not alone. Nearly 2/3 of Australian landlords are now in negative cash flow, injecting personal savings just to keep their properties afloat. Therefore, landlords are not just struggling, they are leaving. Victoria lost 21,712 rental properties in 12 months, more than the state-built capacity to replace. Nationally, 16.7% of investors sold at least one property in 2025, up from 14.1% the year before. But here is the twist that accelerates the crisis. Only 42% of those sold properties remained rentals. The rest converted to owner-occupiers or first home buyers. Every landlord exit shrinks supply and makes the next landlord more likely to leave. It is a death spiral, and it is already spinning. The city where 2,000 families fight for one home. What does this death spiral actually look like on the ground? Let us start with the city that is already broken. Hobart has a 0.4% vacancy rate, the tightest in the nation. But that number does not capture the reality. There are exactly 124 rental properties available for a city of 240,000 people. Do the math, that is roughly 2,000 competing households for every single listing. This is not a market anymore. It is a lottery where almost everyone loses. A government employee earning $72,000 a year with a perfect rental history applied for 14 properties in 1 month. 14 applications, 14 rejections. She was not competing against people with bad credit. She was competing against applicants offering 6 months' rent up front, against couples combining 2 professional incomes, against anyone desperate enough to outbid her. At rental inspections, 20 to 30 people queue around the block for 15-minute windows to view a property and hand over their applications. They arrive early, dress professionally, clutching folders of references, pay stubs, and rental histories. That paperwork used to guarantee approval, and now it barely gets you considered. The median rent sits at $584 per week and is rising 10% annually. For a worker on median income, that is housing stress by any definition. But it is worse than that. The stress is not just financial, it is psychological. When you apply for 14 homes and get rejected 14 times, you start wondering what is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. There just are not enough homes. The crisis nobody sees coming. Hobart at least makes headlines. But there is another city where the crisis is just as severe and almost nobody is paying attention. Perth rents hit $758 a week. That is second only to Sydney, higher than Brisbane, higher than Adelaide. Yet when people discuss Australia's rental crisis, Perth barely gets mentioned. Mining investment and interstate flight from the expensive East Coast have funneled workers into a market with 0.7% vacancy and only 1,384 available properties for more than 2 million people. The desperation here has changed the culture of renting itself. Young couples are now routinely offering 6 months of rent upfront. That is $13,200 or more just to secure a lease. They are wiping out their home ownership savings before they even move in, trading their future for the privilege of having a roof today. Rent bidding has become normalised to the point where landlords openly tell applicants to offer $50 more a week, and they will get approved today. What was once considered predatory is now just how the market works. Think about what that means for a generation trying to build wealth. You save for years to scrape together a house deposit, then you have to spend it on rent just to get approved for a lease. You start over from zero, except now you are paying higher rent than before, which makes saving even harder. The median rent grew 5.8% last year, and there is no ceiling in sight. Perth's crisis built slowly over years while everyone watched Sydney and Melbourne. By the time anyone noticed, the damage was already done. The renewal notice that breaks families. Darwin's crisis did not build slowly, it hit like a shockwave. On paper, 9% annual rent growth sounds manageable compared to other cities. But that average masks what is happening to existing tenants when their leases come up for renewal. Families who locked in leases at $450 per week back in 2023 are now receiving 2025 renewal notices at $600 to $650 per week. That is a 40% increase in 2 years, not gradual inflation, but a sudden cliff that arrives in your mailbox with 30 days' notice. Defence spending surges and major gas projects drove sudden demand into a market with only 255 available properties for 145,000 people. Here is the question that should worry anyone renting in Darwin. What happens when those projects wrap up? The defence contracts are not permanent. The gas facilities will not need construction workers forever. The boom that created this crisis will eventually end, but the high rents might not come down with it. They rarely do. Tenants face an impossible choice right now: pay 45% of their income for rent and pray their wages keep pace, or abandon their jobs and leave before the next renewal notice arrives. The median rent sits at $651 per week, with a vacancy rate of just 1%. Darwin's rental market is not just tight, it is a trap with a timer, and nobody knows when it goes off. The escape that no longer exists. So if the capital cities are broken, what about regional areas? The places that were supposed to be affordable alternatives? Townsville, Mackay and Cairns were the escape plan for workers priced out of Brisbane and Sydney. That was the promise: affordable housing, lower cost of living, still close enough to opportunity. Move north, breathe easier, build a life without drowning in rent. That escape no longer exists. Townsville rents jumped 22.2% in a single year. Mackay jumped 22%. Cairns climbed 12%. These are not Sydney numbers, but they are hitting communities that never built wealth the way Sydney did. A single parent earning $60,000 in Townsville now pays $28,700 annually just for rent. That is nearly half their pre-tax income, before food, utilities, or childcare enter the equation. After tax, she might have $48,000 to work with. Half goes to rent. What is left has to cover everything else for her and her children. These were not supposed to be expensive cities. That was the entire point. Workers moved here specifically because they could not afford anywhere else. Now, food banks across regional Queensland report increasing numbers of working families seeking help. Not unemployed families, but working families who simply cannot make the numbers work anymore. The vacancy rates tell the story. Townsville is under 1%, Cairns is at 0.76%, Mackay is at 0.67%. The affordable alternative has become just another version of the same crisis, except now there is nowhere left to run. The one city that proves everything. But here's the twist nobody expected. There's one city where rents actually are falling. That exception reveals everything about what is broken. Melbourne is the only capital city where rents dropped, down 1.7%, while everywhere else climbed. This is not because Melbourne solved its housing problems or because demand collapsed. It is because Melbourne has the best supply situation of any capital, with a 1.6% vacancy rate and higher building completion rates than other states. There are over 10,000 available rental properties for a city of 5 million people. That single data point proves the entire crisis is supply-driven. Where supply exists, prices stabilise or fall. Where supply disappears, the market breaks. Melbourne is the control group in a nationwide experiment, and it confirms the diagnosis. The problem is that Australia stopped building enough homes, and now mathematics is having its revenge. Why this won't fix itself for a decade? Melbourne proves supply is the solution. So why cannot other cities just build more? The answer is the mismatch nobody wants to talk about. Australia recorded 415,000 net permanent arrivals in the first 9 months of 2025, a new record. Meanwhile, only 142,000 dwellings commenced in year one of the Housing Accord, when the target was 200,000. The country is falling behind on a plan that was already insufficient. And here is the bottleneck that makes this worse. The construction industry needs 130,000 additional workers by 2029, but apprenticeship pipelines take 4 years to produce qualified tradespeople. Even with perfect recruitment starting today, construction will not meaningfully accelerate until 2028 or 2029. This crisis will not self-correct in 3 to 5 years like typical property cycles. Resolution requires 5 to 10 years of sustained building at levels Australia has not achieved in decades. So what happens to renters between now and then? They are already paying 40 to 50% of their income for housing, well past the point where budgets break. At some point, demand destruction occurs, but that does not mean people stop needing homes. It means something much uglier. A single parent earning $60,000 does not stop competing for rentals when she cannot afford them. She becomes homeless, or she migrates out of the region entirely, abandoning her job and her children's schools and everything she built. A geographic underclass is emerging across Australia. Workers are being priced out of major employment hubs, families are unable to access jobs, education or healthcare, and essential workers, nurses, teachers and retail staff are facing commutes of an hour or more each way because they cannot afford to live where they work. The human cost is everywhere if you look. Schools are experiencing mid-semester disruptions as families are forced to relocate with no warning. Children pulled from classrooms because their parents could not afford the renewal notice. Food banks report working families in their queues, people with jobs and paychecks who still cannot make rent, and groceries work in the same month. Investors are fleeing states like Victoria with its 130 new rental regulations and heading to Queensland and Western Australia, creating a two-tier market. Places that can attract investment might eventually build their way out. Places that cannot will continue to spiral. This is not cyclical adjustment that corrects itself, it is structural transformation. Australia is splitting into 2 tiers, cities that build housing and cities that do not. So where does this leave us? This is not a story of rent collapsing in the way most people understand that phrase. It is a story of market structure collapsing. Landlords are fleeing despite record rents because the economics no longer work. Supply is evaporating while demand explodes. It is a self-reinforcing spiral with no relief in sight for years. The crisis is not coming. It is here, playing out differently in each city but following the same brutal logic everywhere. The question is not when will rents fall. That is the wrong question entirely. The question is whether you can afford to be trapped in one of these cities when the pressure finally breaks something. Hobart has 124 properties for 240,000 people. In Perth, you may need $13,000 up front just to compete. In Darwin, your rent can jump 40% with one envelope. In regional Queensland, the escape plan became another trap. Some cities may stabilise if they manage to build enough. Melbourne is proof that supply actually works when governments and developers deliver it. But others are already past the point of no return, locked into death spirals that will take a decade to unwind. The difference between those two futures comes down to construction starts that have not happened yet and workers who have not been trained yet. The smartest move in Australian real estate right now is not finding the next boom suburb. It is recognising which markets are structurally broken and staying far away before the full consequences arrive. For the millions of Australians already trapped in these rental markets, that option is increasingly gone. They are not making a choice anymore. They are just trying to survive until the building catches up, and that could be a very long wait.